let's take a moment to preview polynomial inequalities. We'll look at this again in the future, but it would be good to get a first take at this. So let's look at the function f of x equals x cubed plus x squared minus 9x minus 9. I'd like to solve f of x greater than 0, then solve f of x less than 0, then solve f of x greater than or equal to 0, and then solve f of x less than or equal to 0. So there's 4 separate inequalities, but in each case on the left side you have this polynomial. Now here's the thing, solving for, let's say the first one here, solving f of x greater than 0 means to find all of the x where, I just replace the f of x, it's this x cubed plus x squared minus 9x minus 9, where that has to be bigger than 0. Now, so far we've seen this general format. Inequalities always become inequalities, equations always become equations, but we're going to change this up. There's going to be a little exception. For polynomial inequalities, we're actually going to start with the equation and then go back to the inequality after. It's just because they're confusing enough and there's enough things going on that is actually going to be helpful to look first at the equation. So even though we want to first solve f of x is greater than 0, we want to solve where this polynomial is greater than 0, let's first start with where is this thing equal to 0? What values of x would this equal 0? And to do that, there's 4 terms on the left side, so factor by grouping. Okay, so x squared minus 9 quantity times x plus 1 equals 0. That x squared minus 9 factors further as x plus 3 times x minus 3. There's still a factor of x plus 1 equals 0. So applying the zero product property and solving the little equations, we'll have x equals negative 3, or x equals positive 3, or x equals negative 1. Again, this is not solving the inequalities. This is just solving the equation, but we do this first because drawing a picture of these 3 locations, negative 3, positive 3, and negative 1, at these 3 points, f of x is equal to 0. At these 3 spots is where f of x equals 0. Now we can think about where's f of x greater than 0. And what we should do is think about it like this number line has been cut in 3 spots, right here at negative 3, at negative 1, and at 3. And that's going to leave 4 separate intervals to look at. There's a part to the left of negative 3, which is the negative infinity to negative 3 part. There's this piece between negative 3 and negative 1. That's this negative 3 to negative 1. There's a part between negative 1 and 3. Sorry, typo here. This should say negative 1, comma 3. And then finally, there's a part from 3 to infinity. So let's organize those separate pieces here. And again, sorry about this. This should be a negative 1 right there. Okay. There are these 4 x intervals, and what we need to do is figure out what's going on with the function. So let's look one factor at a time, right? So let's take a look at the x plus 3 factor. And so I'd like to pick an x value that is in this first interval between negative infinity and negative 3. And when you, for instance, pick negative 5 or pick x equals negative 100, then when you do like negative 5 for x plus 3, then you're going to get a negative number. So x plus 3 will be negative. That's what this minus sign reads. This minus sign is when you plug in an x value that's in here, then x plus 3 will be negative. Now we should pick an x value that's between negative 3 and negative 1. So the most natural number to pick there is x equals negative 2. When you use x equals negative 2, you'll have negative 2 plus 3 is positive 1. So we'll record a plus sign here. Now, again, typo. Sorry, this should be negative 1 to positive 3. Pick an x value between negative 1 and positive 3. For instance, you can pick x equals 2. And so 2 plus 3 is 5, which is positive. And now we need to pick an x value that's bigger than 3. For instance, pick x is 4. And then you have 4 plus 3, which is 7, which is positive. We're going to do the same thing with the next factor. So how about with x plus 1? Sorry for switching the order of the factors. So pick an x value that's between negative infinity and negative 3, such as pick x is negative 10, and then negative 10 plus 1 is negative 9, which is a negative number. Pick an x value between negative 3 and negative 1. Probably you'll pick negative 2 for x, and then negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1, which is a negative number. Pick an x value between negative 1 and positive 3. For instance, you could pick x equals 2, and then you'll have 2 plus 1 is 3, which is positive. And now pick an x value between 3 and infinity, such as 4, and 4 plus 1 is 5, which is positive. Now pick an x value for this one last factor here, x minus 3. Pick an x value between negative infinity and negative 3, like negative 100. So negative 100 minus 3 is negative 103, which is a negative number. Pick an x value between negative 3 and negative 1, like x equals negative 2. So we have negative 2 minus 3, which is negative 5. What happened here? So x minus, so this should be a minus sign here, right? X, it's negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5. Yeah, that should be a minus sign. I'll fix that, okay? And you go through, okay? And then the point is a negative times a negative times a negative is a negative, right? So f is this times this times this, and we've analyzed that each of the three pieces would be negative, negative, negative. So a negative times a negative times a negative is a negative. Over here, this should be positive times a negative times, there was a typo here. So plus times negative is a positive. And then here there's a plus times this one should be a negative, another typo. We'll get that fixed. And that should be negative. And then over here, finally, you have a plus times a plus times a plus, which is a positive. So this line, the bottom line is correct, even if some of the work in the middle needs to be fixed up. So what we have is, based on this, we know from right here, with the minus plus minus plus, where f of x is positive and where f of x is negative. So where is f of x positive? F of x is bigger than 0, where this plus sign and that plus sign are. So it's negative 3 to negative 1, and then 3 to infinity here. F of x is negative if x is in, well, this interval or that interval. So it should be negative infinity to negative 3. And then this should actually, same typo, I copied this here. It should say negative 1 to 3, just because there was a typo there earlier. And then what about f of x greater than or equal to 0? Well, then the thing is, we actually include the places where f of x equals 0. And that we saw up here. So we need to include negative 3. We need to include negative 1 itself, and include 3 itself. So that's why there's brackets in these three spots. And then finally, f of x less than or equal to 0, we take the information we had earlier, and then we put brackets right by the numbers again at negative 3 and then at negative 1 bracket and positive 3, because these three locations where f of x equals 0, we need to now include those.